There is a simple truth that almost no one wants to accept, not because it is complicated, but because it is too close. People are not hard to control. They are hard to recognize when they are being controlled. The difference is subtle, but decisive. Real control does not look like an order. It does not sound like a threat. It does not feel like coercion. Real control feels like a personal choice, like a normal reaction, like a decision you believe you made on your own. Most people live convinced that their freedom is intact, that their reactions are authentic, that their emotions are proof of individuality. But in reality, these things are the oldest steering mechanisms there are. Emotion is not expression. It is a trigger. Reaction is not power. It is a sign of vulnerability. And the person who reacts predictably is already positioned beneath the one who observes. Power does not begin when you raise your voice. It begins when you no longer feel the need to raise it, when you no longer rush to explain, when you no longer feel the impulse to correct someone else's perception, when you allow space. Because space is not empty. Space is pressure. There are types of people who surrender this space instantly, not because they are weak, but because they are programmed, not by society, by biology, by fear, by old needs, masked under modern concepts like empathy, openness, authenticity. These types do not need to be conquered, only activated. The first type is the person dependent on validation, not the obvious one, not the one who asks for compliments, but the one who says they do not need them. It is the person who defines themselves by independence, yet regulates their behavior according to the reactions around them. You recognize them by how their tone shifts when they receive no response, by how they add explanations when they receive no confirmation, by the constant micro-adjustments meant to recover lost approval. Biologically, this type is the result of an ancestral fear. The fear of exclusion. In ancient tribes, being ignored meant being dead. The brain quickly learned to seek signals of belonging. Today, the tribe is no longer physical. It is social. It is professional. It is emotional, but the mechanism is identical. The absence of validation is perceived as a threat. That is why this type of person is controllable without effort. Not through attack, but through absence, through neutrality, through short responses, through the lack of emotional reaction. Your silence does not calm them, it destabilizes them. Because silence offers no feedback. And without feedback, their mind begins to create scenarios. They made a mistake. They said something stupid. They lost status. They were evaluated negatively. At that moment, you are no longer the one doing anything. They are. They begin to speak more, to explain, to justify, to offer information you did not ask for, to make concessions you did not request, all to repair the imbalance, an imbalance created not by an action, but by the lack of one. The second type is the person dominated by emotional reaction, not necessarily angry, but reactive. The person who cannot tolerate unresolved tension, who feels the need to respond immediately, to clarify, to set things straight. This type confuses intensity with power. They believe reacting quickly means being dominant. In reality, it means being predictable. A reactive person is a person who can be guided with minimal stimuli, a pause that is too long, a neutral look, an ambiguous remark, and the reaction appears uncontrollable. Because their nervous system cannot tolerate ambiguity, it needs resolution, it needs release, it needs to feel that control has been regained. But the moment they react, they lose the frame. The rhythm is no longer theirs. Emotion compresses their thinking. It makes them see attack where none exists. It makes them say things that can later be used. It makes them expose themselves. And all you have to do is remain stable, calm, slow. Because the difference in rhythm automatically creates a hierarchy. The third type is the person who identifies with perceived intelligence, not with real clarity, but with the image of the one who knows. This type cannot tolerate being seen as confused, limited, or uncertain. That is why they avoid pauses. They fill space. They correct nuances. They add details. They cling to precision like armor. Control over this type does not come from direct confrontation, but from simple questions. Questions that neither affirm nor deny. Questions that ask for explanation without offering validation. Their mind cannot tolerate this void. They will try to prove, to show, to impress. And in doing so, they will assume the role of conversational subordinate on their own. Because the one who explains excessively automatically positions themselves beneath the one who listens without haste. The fourth type is the person who confuses harmony with safety, the pleasant person. The person who avoids conflict not because it is strategic, but because it is uncomfortable. This type has been conditioned to believe that tension is dangerous, that saying no is aggressive, that disappointing someone is a fault. Biologically, this behavior comes from attachment, from the need to maintain connection. Socially, it is rewarded, it is praised, but in real power structures, it is exploited because the person who avoids discomfort will do almost anything to eliminate it, including giving up ground, accepting conditions, conforming. You do not need to pressure them, you only need to create a subtle moment of tension, a calmly stated request, an unspoken expectation, a pause after a vague refusal. They will feel the pressure and try to neutralize it, not for you, for themselves, and that makes them predictable. The fifth type is the person who declares themselves detached, cynical, immune. The person who says they no longer invest emotionally, that they have learned, that they are not like before. This position appears strong, but it is often a defensive mechanism. Beneath the cynicism lie unresolved failures, unprocessed disappointments, denied desires. This type is controllable through partial agreement, through reflection, through not directly contradicting them, but also not fully confirming their story. This ambiguity forces them to explain themselves, to justify themselves, to prove that their detachment is authentic, and while doing so, they reveal exactly what they claim they no longer have: attachment. What links all these types is not weakness, it is automatism, reflex, the absence of internal observation. People are not controlled because they are stupid. They are controlled because they are fast, because they react before they see what is happening, because they confuse impulse with truth. Real power does not consist in manipulating others, but in no longer being pulled into their patterns, in remaining stable enough to see how they move around you, in allowing space. Because in space, a person exposes themselves. There is nothing spectacular here. There is no adrenaline, there is no triumph, there is only a shift in position, from reaction to observation, from emotional participation to frame control. And once this shift takes place, you cannot fully go back, because you see too clearly. Once you begin to see these patterns, a strange sensation appears. It is not satisfaction, it is not enthusiasm, it is distance. A small separation between you and the impulse to react. And this is exactly where real change begins. Because the moment you are no longer completely absorbed by the interaction, you become hard to move, not invincible, but stable. And stability is rare. Most people are not controlled because someone is smarter than they are. They are controlled because someone is slower, more attentive, more willing not to fill the space. In every interaction, there is a frame. Someone sets it, someone maintains it, someone loses it. And losing the frame does not feel like defeat. It feels like an impulse, like a necessary reaction, like a need to say something, to clarify, to fix. People believe they are powerful when they have something to say. In reality, the most powerful people in a conversation are those who can remain silent without internal tension, because silence without tension is impossible to read, and what cannot be read cannot be anticipated, and what cannot be anticipated cannot be controlled. There is a subtle mechanism that appears in all types of people who are easily controlled: the need for resolution. The human brain hates ambiguity. It perceives it as danger. When something is unclear, the mind tries to close the loop, to draw a conclusion, to eliminate discomfort. People who cannot sit with ambiguity are the first to surrender control. The validation-dependent person cannot tolerate ambiguity of perception. They do not know whether they are accepted or not, so they try to find out. The reactive person cannot tolerate ambiguity of intention. They do not know whether they are being attacked or not, so they strike first. The person who wants to appear intelligent cannot tolerate ambiguity of status. They do not know whether they are seen as competent, so they prove themselves. The pleasant person cannot tolerate relational ambiguity. They do not know whether tension exists, so they smooth it over. The cynical person cannot tolerate ambiguity of meaning. They do not know whether their detachment is justified, so they explain it. They all try to close a loop. You do not need to close it. You only need to leave it open. Here, a dangerous confusion appears. Many people who discover these dynamics believe that power lies in using them aggressively, in intentionally creating discomfort, in provoking, in actively manipulating. These people are easy to recognize. They are restless, rushed. They take pleasure too quickly in others' reactions, and precisely because of this, they lose control, because the desire to control is itself a visible weakness. Real power is not desired, it is tolerated. It is a consequence of not needing to obtain anything immediately, of not needing to win the interaction, of not needing to be understood, of not needing to be liked, of not needing to be validated. Every need removed reduces your exposure. Most people enter interactions with an emotional objective: to be appreciated, to be respected, to be seen, to be confirmed. Even conflicts are often desperate attempts at validation. Look at me. Count me. Acknowledge me. But the person who asks for nothing emotionally cannot be easily directed, because they have no obvious lever. At this point, you begin to notice something uncomfortable, not only in others, in yourself. The moments when you feel the impulse to respond, to explain, to correct, to defend yourself. These impulses are not moral failures, they are reflexes. But once you see them as reflexes, you can no longer justify them as necessary. You will notice how your body reacts before your mind: tension in the chest, accelerated breathing, the need to fill the silence, the need to regain control. This is where power is usually lost, not in words, but in micro moments of haste, in those fractions of a second when reaction feels inevitable. But inevitable does not mean mandatory. Those who learn to remain in these moments without reacting develop something rare: not charisma, not visible dominance, but weight, presence, a sense that they cannot be pushed easily, that they are not automatically pulled into the emotional games of others. And this sensation is perceived immediately, even if no one can clearly explain it. People will begin to adjust around you. They will talk more. They will test boundaries. They will try to read you, not because you are aggressive, but because you are not reactive. The absence of reaction is interpreted as power, not because it is power in itself, but because it is rare. Here, a shift in perspective appears. You begin to see interactions not as exchanges of words, but as exchanges of state. Who is tense? Who is relaxed? Who is rushing? Who is waiting? Who fills the space? Who leaves it? And you quickly observe that the one who fills the space loses position, always. This is not a technique. It is a psychological reality. The person who speaks to eliminate discomfort is already in an inferior position to the one who can tolerate discomfort without moving. Power is not in words. It is in the ability not to use them. As the pressure increases, you will feel the temptation to turn these observations into action, to use people, to test, to experiment. This is a trap, because it pulls you back into desire, into need, into impulse, and everything impulsive is visible. The real move is internal. It is the withdrawal of emotional identification. It is detachment from outcome. It is the ability to remain present without investing. In that moment, control appears without being sought, because people project their own needs onto you and attempt to resolve them themselves. You do not become colder. You become clearer. You do not become harder. You become more stable. You do not become without emotion. You become not led by it. And for most people, this position is confusing. For some, threatening. For others, fascinating. But for all, difficult to ignore. This is the stage where you begin to understand that not all people need to be controlled. Some control themselves. All you have to do is not stop them. And here, the pressure changes. It no longer comes from the outside. It comes from the inside. From the fact that you can no longer pretend you do not see, that you do not understand, that you do not observe. Once you have this clarity, emotional reaction begins to feel primitive. Urgency feels childish. The need for validation feels transparent. It does not disappear, but it no longer leads you. This is not mastery yet. It is unlearning. It is the deactivation of the reflexes that made you easy to read, easy to push, easy to guide. And without this stage, any attempt at power is only noise. The pressure is only beginning to settle. As this distance settles in, a side effect appears that few anticipate. You begin to see how much of human behavior is theater. Not conscious theater, but automatic. Learned lines, repeated gestures, emotions triggered on command. People are not reacting to you. They are reacting to what your presence represents for their internal system. This is an uncomfortable realization because it shows you something about yourself. How often you have played the same roles. How often you reacted not because it was necessary, but because it was familiar. Because that is how you were conditioned. Because reaction made you feel that you existed in that moment, that you had a place, that you mattered. At this point, many people try to turn back, not to old behaviors, but to old justifications. They tell themselves that everything is just psychology, that it doesn't matter, that they don't want to become cold. But this is only another defense mechanism, because the truth is simpler. It is not about becoming something else. It is about seeing what was always there. People talk about authenticity as if it were an automatic virtue, as if expressed emotion were by definition truth. But emotion is often a reflex, a discharge, an attempt to restore internal balance. It is not an act of courage. It is an act of regulation, and whoever regulates their emotions externally becomes dependent on the reactions of others. When you no longer participate automatically in this exchange, something shifts in the power dynamic. Not because you dominate others, but because you no longer provide material. You no longer provide clear reactions. You no longer provide rapid confirmation. You no longer provide immediate tension. And in the absence of these things, people begin to move differently. Some become restless. They will try to provoke you, to irritate you, to force you to react. Not because they are hostile, but because they need feedback. Others become more cooperative. They will offer more. They will try to please you, not because you asked, but because your calm makes them assume that an evaluation is taking place. Here you must be careful, because the temptation is to interpret these reactions as a sign of your own superiority. But this is just another ego trap. You are not superior. You are less emotionally involved. And this difference creates asymmetry. Asymmetry is the foundation of all power relationships. Whoever invests more emotionally is more vulnerable. Whoever attaches more is easier to move. Whoever has more to lose will concede first. These things are not moral. They are structural. They appear in any human system, regardless of intention. You begin to notice that people reveal their sensitive points without being asked. The validation-dependent person will talk about their efforts, about sacrifices, about how much they try. The reactive person will talk about injustices, about lack of respect, about what they cannot tolerate. The person who wants to appear intelligent will talk about others' competence, or the lack of it. The pleasant person will talk about harmony, about the team, about how important it is to understand each other. The cynical person will talk about how little they still care. All of these are signals. They do not need to be deeply interpreted. They do not need to be excessively analyzed. They only need to be observed. Because what people say repeatedly without being asked is exactly where they are sensitive, exactly where they react, exactly where they can be directed. But again, direction is not something you actively do. It is something that happens when you do not intervene, when you do not correct, when you do not save, when you do not fix, when you do not enter the game. The absence of intervention is the most underestimated form of influence. As you continue to remain in this position, you begin to feel a form of isolation. Not physical, emotional. Conversations feel more superficial. Others' reactions feel more transparent. Jokes feel more mechanical. Conflicts feel more predictable. This is not depression. It is disenchantment. Disenchantment is the state in which you see the mechanism, not the story. It is the state in which you are no longer absorbed by the narrative. And this state is uncomfortable because it separates you from the automatic reactions that once gave you a sense of belonging. But at the same time, it gives you something few have, the freedom not to react. Here, an important shift appears in your relationship with yourself. You begin to observe your own patterns with the same clarity. The moments when you want to be appreciated. The moments when you want to win. The moments when you want to be seen as intelligent. The moments when you want to avoid tension. The moments when you want to appear detached. All of these are the same types, only now you see them from the inside. This is the part most people do not take to the end, because it is easier to see mechanisms in others than in yourself. But without this stage, everything remains theory. Real power does not come from reading others. It comes from no longer being readable yourself. Not being readable does not mean being fake. It means not offering automatic reactions, not responding from reflex, not explaining yourself from anxiety, not correcting from pride, not yielding from discomfort, not hiding in cynicism. Each of these non-actions is a withdrawal of energy from the system, and when you withdraw enough energy, something stabilizes, not the outside, the inside. Emotions no longer demand immediate attention, impulses no longer feel urgent, thoughts no longer demand instant expression. An internal space is created, a space in which you can choose, or choose nothing at all. At this point, the people around you will begin to treat you differently, without knowing why. Some will be more respectful, others more defensive. Some will try to dominate you, others to win you over. Not because you have become someone else, but because you are no longer predictable. Predictability is the currency of control. When you are not predictable, you are not easy to position. And what cannot be positioned creates discomfort. This discomfort makes others move, expose themselves, make mistakes, offer information. You do not need to take advantage, only to see. Because once you see enough, emotional reaction begins to feel unnecessary, like background noise, like interference, not because you are above it, but because you are no longer caught in it. This is the stage where many people become quieter, not from shyness, but from lack of necessity. They no longer speak to fill space. They speak only when something needs to be said, and even then, without haste. The pressure now no longer comes from others. It comes from your clarity. From the fact that you can no longer pretend you don't know what you are doing when you react. That you can no longer blame circumstances, that you can no longer say, "That's just how I am." This is real responsibility, not moral, structural, to know when you react and why, and to choose more and more often not to. At this point, something breaks permanently, not on the outside, but in the way you perceive human interaction. You stop seeing people as good or bad. These labels become useless. You begin to see them as systems, systems of reactions, systems of defense, systems of needs seeking to be satisfied without being acknowledged. This perspective does not make you cynical. Cynicism is emotional. It is a reaction to disappointment. What appears here is colder than cynicism. It is neutrality. And neutrality is difficult to tolerate for those who live off reaction. You will notice that people begin to project onto you. Some will perceive you as distant, others as intimidating, others as mysterious. All of these interpretations say more about them than about you, because when you do not provide clear signals, the other person's mind fills the gaps with their own fears or desires. Here, a rule appears that few understand intuitively. The less you explain who you are, the more weight others will assign to you. Explanation reduces the perception of power. Excessive clarification equalizes positions. When you feel the need to be fully understood, you lower yourself to the level of the one who is evaluating you. This is one of the hardest needs to abandon, the need to be understood, to be seen correctly, to not be misinterpreted. But every attempt to control another's perception is, paradoxically, a loss of control. Because you enter their frame, you no longer hold your own. Powerful people are not those who are understood by everyone. They are those who do not feel the need to be understood immediately. Ambiguity works for them, time works for them, silence works for them. As you continue to remain in this position, you will notice something uncomfortable. Not everyone will stay. Some will withdraw. Others will become hostile. Others will try to provoke you more aggressively. This is not a failure. It is a filter. People who live on constant emotional exchange cannot function around someone who does not participate automatically. Your lack of reaction disrupts their system. And instead of adapting, they prefer to leave or to attack. Not because you did something, but because you did not do what they expected. Here, a silent decision appears, not expressed, not declared. whether you are willing to lose connections based on reflex, whether you are willing to be without certain forms of validation, whether you are willing to no longer be easy to digest, because real power demands a cost, and that cost is social comfort. You do not become antisocial, you become selective without effort, because you no longer invest energy in maintaining relationships through reaction. The relationships that remain are slower, rarer, quieter, but more stable, because they are not built on mutual emotional regulation. At this stage, the temptation is to believe that you have arrived, that you now hold control. But this would be the last reflex to dismantle. The need to see yourself as being above the game is still a reaction, still a story, still an identity. True stability appears when even the idea of control is no longer central, when you no longer seek to dominate, but also not to avoid, when you no longer want to win, but also not to lose, when you simply remain in position regardless of the movements around you. This position is difficult to describe because it is not dramatic. It has no emotional peaks. It has no visible triumphs. It has consistency. It has weight. It has a form of quiet that does not come from peace, but from the absence of internal conflict. There is no longer a struggle between impulse and image, between emotion and strategy, between desire and behavior. Because the impulse is seen, the emotion is felt. But neither dictates action automatically anymore. The people around you will continue to play their games. They will seek validation. They will react. They will demonstrate. They will avoid. They will pose. None of this stops. The difference is that they no longer pull you into it. Or if they try, you immediately feel the tension and choose not to follow it. This is the final form of psychological autonomy, not independence from others, but independence from reaction to others, not isolation, but non-reflexive involvement, not cold detachment, but clarity without haste. At this point, controlling others becomes almost irrelevant because you no longer need to exercise it. People self-regulate around you. They adjust. They expose themselves. They calm down or become agitated. And you remain constant. This constancy is perceived as authority, not because you display it, but because you do not negotiate it. You do not explain it. You do not defend it. It is there. And that is all. The end of this process is not a revelation. It is not a clear moment. It is an accumulation, a fatigue of reaction, a loss of interest in dramatism, a lack of appetite for obvious psychological games. Emotional reaction begins to feel noisy, predictable, inefficient, not because you are better, but because you see what it produces, and it is no longer worth the cost. What remains is a state of internal silence, not emptiness, not apathy, but the absence of urgency, the absence of the need to intervene, the absence of the desire to control. And from this absence, paradoxically, the most solid form of power appears. Having reached this point, something becomes evident without being clearly formulated. There is no longer the desire to prove, nor to correct, nor to gain position. The game continues around you, but it no longer demands you, not because you stepped out of it, but because you no longer react to its implicit rules. This is the difference most people do not understand. Stepping out of the game is a reaction, no longer reacting is a position. People continue to seek the same things: validation, release, confirmation, safety, meaning. They will continue to use the same mechanisms. They will continue to press the same buttons. Only now, you no longer respond automatically. And in the absence of response, their energy no longer finds a point of impact. Here, the illusion of external control as a goal disappears completely, because you realize something uncomfortable. Controlling others was always a compensatory activity, an attempt to stabilize something internal, to cover an insecurity, to regulate attention, to obtain an indirect confirmation of your own position. When that internal tension no longer exists, control becomes unnecessary, not because it is not possible, but because it is no longer needed. This is the part you will not hear often, not because it is secret, but because it lacks spectacle. Real power does not feel intense. It feels stable. It does not produce adrenaline. It produces the absence of it. It does not create impulses. It dissolves them. You begin to notice that many conflicts are merely disguised requests, that many provocations are invitations to react, that many status games are attempts to make you position yourself below, above, or against someone. And you no longer accept the invitation. You do not refuse. You do not confront. You do not explain. You simply do not enter. This non-participation changes everything. Because psychological games require two sides. When one no longer plays, the other either escalates or withdraws. In both cases, they expose themselves. And exposure is inevitable when someone plays alone. Here, a quiet appears that is different from ordinary quiet. It is not relaxation. It is not peace. It is the absence of internal friction. There is no longer a struggle between what you feel and what you should show, between what you think and what you should say, between impulse and image. You are no longer pushed from within. And a person who is not pushed from within cannot be easily pushed from the outside. This is the state in which emotional reaction begins to feel primitive. Not shameful, not wrong, primitive. Like a reflex that belongs to an older version of you, one that needed to assert itself, to defend itself, to constantly define itself through opposition or confirmation. There is no contempt for that version, only distance. At this point, you no longer seek to identify types of people in order to control them. You see them automatically, without effort, without interest, not to use their weaknesses, but because you are no longer caught in them. When someone seeks validation, you observe. When someone reacts, you observe. When someone demonstrates, you observe. When someone avoids, you observe. When someone poses as detached, you observe. And observation is enough. There is no longer an urgency to intervene, to correct the dynamic, to take advantage of the moment, because you know that any advantage gained through another's reaction is temporary, and any stability gained through non-reaction is cumulative. True power accumulates slowly, quietly, without visible proof, without external confirmation. It is built from thousands of small moments in which you could have reacted and did not. From thousands of impulses seen and allowed to pass, from thousands of situations in which you chose to remain in position without explaining why. This accumulation does not make you more vocal. It makes you harder to move. It does not make you more impressive. It makes you more stable. It does not make you more feared. It makes you clearer. And clarity is the most uncomfortable thing for those who live on emotional confusion. At the end, there is nothing left to prove, not to yourself, not to others. There is no role to play, no mask to maintain, only a presence that does not rush, does not defend itself, does not justify itself. The world continues to be noisy. People continue to react. Games continue to be played. The difference is that you no longer feel the need to enter them in order to feel that you exist. You already exist, without reaction. And from this point on, any reaction becomes a choice, not a reflex. This is the final form of control, not over others, but over the impulse to be pulled into them. And once this state settles in, there is nothing left to add. No next step, no promise, no spectacular conclusion, only silence. hard to move, hard to read, hard to control.